So now we will move on to our program this morning. We have a fabulous panel. This has been a long tradition here at TwinWest to bring you a session review program in June each year. So we're going to have to come up with a new name for this. I guess it'll be the first part session review interlude, maybe we could call this. But we certainly have a lot to talk about. So we all know that the GOP-controlled legislature and governor did not reach agreement on major budget issues facing the state. So a special session will be required to avoid a government shutdown on July 1st, or as the case may be, to stop the government shutdown that will have begun on July 1st. So what did and didn't happen this session? What are the prospects in a special session? What deals could get reached before the shutdown? And what are the impacts to the business community? So to help us skillfully navigate a discussion with really a powerhouse panel of speakers this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce this morning's program moderator, who is backed by popular demand, Tom Hauser. Tom started 5 Eyewitness News in September 1992 after reporting and news anchoring jobs in Austin, Minnesota, Fort Myers, Florida, and Des Moines, Iowa. After covering the law enforcement beat in the Twin Cities for several years, Tom began covering Minnesota politics in 1997. He hosts the 5 Eyewitness News at Issue public affairs program on Sunday mornings. In 2002, he authored Inside the Ropes with Jesse Ventura, a book about the remarkable 4-year term of Governor Jesse Ventura. In 1983, he received a bachelor's degree in journalism and political science from the University of St. Thomas. In 1992, he earned a master's degree in journalism and mass communication from Drake University in Des Moines. He has earned a number of awards for his news reporting, including Emmy Awards for his coverage in the plane crash of Senator Paul Wellstone and for stories that helped solve the 1970 murder of St. Paul police officer Jim Sackett. He has received 3 Emmy Awards for At Issue as the Best Public Affairs Program and 2 Emmys for television host of the Minnesota State High School Hockey Tournament on KSTC TV Channel 45. So please join me in a very warm TwinWest welcome for Tom Hauser.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize in advance. My voice this is actually on the comeback trail, believe it or not. 2 days ago, I couldn't even form a sound. I was at the Capitol. A lot of people thought that was a good thing, and they were hoping that would happen to more people at the Capitol. But it only happened to me. I was on the elevator, and as the course of the day went on, I started with kind of a sore throat, and by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was trying to talk to somebody in the elevator, and nothing came out. So that was not good. So if at times my voice cracks this morning, it may sound like I'm going through puberty again, but no, it's just this. Or as my wife would say, what do you mean again? But that's a different story. It was good. Last night I sat through my oldest son's high school graduation from Minnetonka, a 3.5-hour, nearly 4-hour ceremony. It was good. I couldn't talk, so it did help me try to preserve my voice a little bit. And so it occurred to me that next year I will have a child in college. I will have one in high school, one in middle school, because he just graduated from elementary school on Wednesday, and then I'll still have one in elementary school. So I'll have one at all 4 of those levels. So the great thing is that next year, when I need an expert on education to come on At Issue, I'm calling myself. Just call me. Just call me up. I know I'll be available. Thank you all for coming this morning. This really is an amazing time in the state's history. It seems like we say this every couple of years in Minnesota, not just with the budget, but our elections tend to have some pretty quirky results as well, which is what makes covering politics in Minnesota so much fun and so fascinating. But I got to tell you, I don't know how they get out of this. I've been covering the Capitol again since 1997, and I've seen a lot of politicians come and a lot of politicians go, and a lot of budget problems come and go, and I got to tell you, I don't know how they work their way out of this one. But I will tell you, I am somewhat clairvoyant because in the debate that we hosted on Channel 5 on October 30th last fall, the first question I asked each of the gubernatorial candidates is, will you allow government to shut down if you cannot reach a budget deal? Because I could tell during the campaign last year that there were no gray areas between where these people all stood. This was black and this was white. And Mark Dayton said no, he would not allow government to shut down, although a few seconds later he also said he would not compromise on his on wanting to raise taxes on the wealthy. So that was all in the same answer. So I don't know exactly what that meant. Tom Emmer very skillfully did not answer the question, which may have been the best answer of all, because I would not have been able to use it against him. And then Tom Horner had an interesting answer. He said, well, of course it won't be a government shutdown because I'm in the Independence Party. I'll be able to take, the best ideas from both sides and we'll reach a compromise. Who knows? Maybe he was right, maybe not. But it was interesting that even last fall, I think a lot of people saw this coming. And then finally this morning, it's interesting because we're pretty much right where we were, I think, in January. And now January weather is back. So this is all, it's all kind of coming together. I don't know what this means. But without any further ado, that's just a little preamble about where we stand right now. We're going to get more into that in just a moment, but I would like to introduce our panel, and I will bring each one of them up. Please hold your applause until after all four of them are introduced. I will begin with Laura Broad. Laura, come on up. She joined the law firm of Lockridge, Grindle, and now in this past spring as a senior strategic advisor focusing on business development and government affairs. The New Prague Republican served 4 terms in the House representing District 25A from 2003 to 2010. In 2005, she was elected to serve as the GOP House Caucus Assistant Majority Leader. From 2007 to 2008, she served as Assistant Minority Leader. Laura decided not to run for re-election last year, making her perhaps the smartest person in the state. Prior to her service in the Minnesota legislature, she served on the New Prague City Council. She attended the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus and received her BA in Geography and Russian Area Studies. Now, see, I didn't know that. She graduated summa cum laude, another thing we don't have in common, in 1993. She went on to attend the Minnesota State University, where she received her master's degree in urban and regional studies in 1998. Laura was among a slate of 4 candidates this past spring elected to 6-year terms on the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Please join me in welcoming Laura Broad to our panel. And up next, Darren Broughton. Darren, are you out there? There he is. Darren has been a director at Thunheim, where he has managed several public affairs and public relations campaigns for clients with issues in front of the Minnesota legislature and Congress. Prior to joining Thunheim, Darren toiled in the political trenches and held several positions for elected officials in government agencies, including Congressman Bill Luther, the Minnesota Attorney General's Office, and the Minnesota Senate. He has also held several leadership and advisory roles on DFL campaigns since 2000. Please join me in welcoming Darren Broughton to the panel. Up next, Matt Intenza is the founder and board chair of Minnesota 2020, a public policy think tank based in St. Paul. He is a senior policy fellow of the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., and the National Advisory Board of the New America Foundation in Washington, D.C. Matt has had a long career as a nonprofit attorney. He has been an assistant Minnesota Attorney General specializing in nonprofit litigation, a white-collar crime prosecutor specializing in nonprofits, and a private practice attorney working with nonprofits in crisis. He also worked for the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. He was the Democratic leader of the Minnesota State House of Representatives. He specialized in civil and human rights, nonprofit, and education issues. Please join me in welcoming Matt Intenza to the panel. And last but not least, Ben Golnick. Ben, as actually all of these folks do, regularly appear as political analysts on At Issue, a weekly public affairs show on KSTP. I forget the guy who runs that show, but pretty good guy here. He is often also called on by the press corps to provide insight on political issues. In March of 2011, Ben was selected for the 40 under 40 list by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal. I was named to that in 1991, so I felt pretty good about that. I was 20 at the time. Most recently, Ben served as the general consultant to the Minnesota Senate Republican Victory Fund. Ben helped engineer the campaign strategy that gave Republicans their first majority in 38 years and a net pickup of 16 seats, the most of any Senate caucus in the nation. In the 2008 election cycle, Ben served in a senior position for the McCain presidential campaign, overseeing activities in 6 states. Ben also was the lead political consultant to the Minnesota House of Representatives and served as media liaison for Governor Tim Pawlenty during the presidential primary season. Please join me in welcoming Ben Golnick to the panel. I don't think my voice cracked even once. Well, Ben, since you were one of the architects of the Senate takeover, Republican takeover of the Senate, did you anticipate what has happened now, given the fact that we ended up once again with a split government, except this time it's gone the other way. No longer a Republican in the governor's office, but a Democrat, but now Republicans controlling the legislature. When you saw that happen, did you anticipate this might be the outcome, a special session and a potential for government shutdown?
Well, I think everyone would have said if the Senate was going to be taken over by the Republicans, you'd likely have a Republican governor. So just, I guess, goes to show you how unpredictable politics is. But I'm not surprised. This group of Republicans that came in, there's 21 freshman Republicans in the Senate out of 37, so a majority of the majority are freshmen. And I was impressed. I mean, these are strong conservatives, and if anything, I guess I've been pleasantly surprised they've all stuck together, and they have dug their heels in, but they're not going to raise taxes, and I've been very impressed by that. So not a big surprise.
Madam Tenza, you're familiar with the dynamic at the Capitol from a number of different perspectives. When you saw what happened after Election Day, there were a lot of people who knew the moment the election was over that this is the direction we were likely headed. Did you see it that way?
Well, Tom, you and I lived this back in 2005, which was the last time we had a government shutdown. But for everyone to be clear, it was a partial government shutdown. We managed to pass a lot of the budget bills, except for education and human services. And so this is going to be very different. But I don't think there's any question when you've got the immovable object, which I think is the Republican legislative caucuses, and then you've got the unstoppable force, which is Dayton, who managed to win in a year that otherwise Republicans were winning, and who has dug in hard on the issue of revenue. It's going to be hard to compromise. And I think we're going to have a prolonged shutdown as a result, because for the Republicans, the position that Ben was talking about not wanting to raise revenue, it's hard to compromise off of saying you're not going to do something. And likewise, the governor has dug in pretty hard as well. And I think it's going to be up to the public to push both sides into a position if we're going to get something resolved, because I think the public wants people to compromise.
Darren Broden, excuse me, both sides are dug in, as Matt just mentioned. It's not just the Republicans in the House and Senate who are immovable. It seems the governor is too. Is one of these sides, I mean, can one of them give in and still save face? Is that even possible?
I think they have to give in, because I think we're at the point right now, a government shutdown is detrimental to everyone. I think we've seen a lot of posturing since the end of session, a lot of quote-unquote compromises. Really, at the end of the day, all we've seen is really the moving of the deck chairs on the Titanic. There's really not been any real movement out there, and we really got to find a way to come together and solve the problem. I don't think either the governor nor the Republican leadership have a plan yet to do that.
Laura, again, you also served in the legislature. As you see the dynamic the way it is now, one interesting twist to all of this is that every member of the legislature is up for re-election next year. Governor Dayton is not. How does that impact what goes on here in the next couple of weeks or months?
Well, I'm not actually sure that that does impact it, because there's a lot of members, new members of the legislature, who truly believe that they were elected to do a specific job in restraining the growth of government. And I think a lot of them would say, you know what, if that means that I'm not reelected next time, I'm okay with that. So I don't think that there is as much of a view to the campaign as typical because of that dynamic. But what's interesting about the way the reverse happened this year, we talk about there was 2 Democratic legislatures, 1 Republican governor. Now we're the exact reverse, yet we're not. Because the reverse, the dynamic is so different, because before, Governor Pawlenty could just trim down bills. He could cut what he didn't want, and then you could get to a number that got smaller. But unfortunately, what Governor Dayton wants, he can't get, because he can't create revenue. The House and the Senate have to. So the dynamic is extremely different, even though it's suggested that it's reverse.
Right, and by the way, feel free to jump in at any time during this. You can pick up the microphone if you want to, before I prompt you, if you want to engage one of your other panelists. Madam Tenza, the idea of raising taxes just on the wealthiest 2%. Clearly, Governor Dayton and the Democrats have done a pretty good job of getting that word out to the public, and a lot of people see it that way. There are a lot of polls that have been done that say, they'd like a mix of tax increases and spending cuts. Why, in your estimation, again, I realize from your Democratic perspective, are Republicans even resistant to raising taxes just on a very small portion of Minnesotans?
Well, I think what we've seen over the last 20 years is that Republicans are not only, since George Bush the first said first, read my lips, no new taxes, and then went ahead and wound up compromising, which I think was good for the country because it helped solve our deficit in line with some of the things President Clinton did. But that compromise didn't go over very well for him. And we now see a Republican Party with Tony Sutton as the chair that's saying that even a modest fee increase somewhere or any type of revenue increase is anathema. When you have a party that digs in that hard, it becomes very difficult, obviously, to find any compromise. And the public has been very consistent, and of course, the majority of voters out there, since we had a three-way race for governor, and Tom Horner was willing to raise some revenue, and obviously Mark Dayton was, who've said they want a balanced approach. Governor Dayton has said he wants to make cuts, and we have to make cuts because we have a structural deficit, but he believes we need to raise some revenue. The other difficulty with the Republican approach is that it's not a matter if we don't raise income taxes that no one is going to pay more. The Republican budget that was passed cuts 140,000 people off of health care. Now, as private sector employers, those costs are going to get shifted onto you and your insurance. It's not a free ride. People are still going to get sick. Those 140,000 people are going to show up at HCMC or they're going to show up at another hospital. That hospital's got a cost shift onto your insurance, and you're going to pay more. Estimates are that property taxes will go up 5%. You will pay more. And so you either pay to make sure that some folks that are lower income have access to insurance through taxes, or you pay for it through the back door. I'd rather not have people going to the ER for their primary health care. I think that's a lot more efficient.
Laura Broad, do you buy the argument that property taxes automatically have to go up?
No, I'm a former local government official, and I know that local government officials make those decisions. And obviously, there's pressures on you as a local government official in terms of where your money is coming from. But you make the decisions related to the property taxes, and property taxes have been increasing over time because of the market. The market had been going up, and now the market is being held, and so property taxes are being held. But in regards to the rhetoric around compromise, the rhetoric doesn't match reality. Because if the Republicans made an error in the beginning, it would be that they started reasonable, whereas Mark Dayton did not. When the Republicans didn't start at a no-growth budget, they started at a $2 billion growth budget, a 6% growth in our state's budget from where we were last year. So to suggest that that's not a compromise, to suggest that that's not a reasonable approach is just simply inaccurate. And so when you look at where we're going, compromise should not mean giving away the farm. I mean, if you guys are doing any business deal, if you're buying a home, if you come in at $400,000 or a business, somebody else comes in at $600,000, meeting in the middle, if you can't afford it, doesn't work. And so compromise should not mean giving away anything. Compromise should mean finding those places where your interests overlap, finding common ground, finding those things that you can do without disrupting and discarding the future. And I think that's what the Republicans are not wanting to compromise, is the economic future of the state. And unfortunately, right now, what Mark Dayton is doing in terms of his class warfare is something that is rejected, I think, by the people, even though the polls suggest, well, heck, if I can have somebody else pay for things, yeah, why not? But the fact of the matter is that taxing the top 2% actually taxes everybody, because you tax businesses, you tax jobs, and you effectively tax our economy in a way that we just simply can't afford it.
Darren Broughton, weigh in here. Is this class warfare?
It's not class warfare, and I'm sorry, and I know the legislature's had a problem this session with fuzzy math, and this is an example of it. Let's be honest. This biennium, we are spending $34.5 billion. $34.5 billion. That includes one-time money. That includes all the shifts and the gimmicks from Governor Pawlenty and the DFL legislature last year. So let's just be honest about the number that we're spending. The Republican budget is actually less than we were spending this biennium, right? It's 34. Against state revenue, it's less than we're spending this year. So the governor's proposal is fair and honest, because you know what? It's only raising revenue or raising spending in the state 3.7% over 2 years. That's less than 2% growth a year. So I think we just got to be honest about the math.
Ben, speaking of math, there were people who wanted to turn down the federal stimulus money for this very reason, that it was one-time money, it was not sustainable, and there were going to be expectations that this just keep coming.
Well, and the Democrats want to make you think you had stimulus money come in last time. This wasn't going to happen every year, going forward. So I think to factor in stimulus money is, an expectation just isn't reality. I mean, from my perspective, this is very, very simple. I mean, Mark Dayton wants to take more money from the private sector, from most of you folks in here, to grow government. And it just boggles my mind that this is where we're at. I mean, you've got New York State, Andrew Cuomo, a liberal who's not raising taxes in New York State as a liberal Democrat. He gets it. I don't know why. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me why Mark Dayton is so dug in, is just hell-bent on raising taxes on people. And even when the Democrats were in the majority and we had a surplus, they raised income taxes or proposed to raise income taxes. So all we continually see from Mark Dayton and the Democrats is income tax increases, and translated, that is taking money out of your pockets to grow government. And I think that's unacceptable, and I think Minnesotans didn't vote for that this last election.
Matt and Tenzo, what was
Actually,
government?
Tom, can I just respond?
You can
real
add to
quick?
this, but let me just throw this out there too. Was government spending on an unsustainable path? I mean, would you agree with that you can't keep growing 15, 20% a year?
Well, we haven't been growing 15, 20% a year. I think that Dan had that right in terms of the growth level. We have a structural deficit caused because we have a recession. The Great Recession has meant that state revenue has declined. Governor Pawlenty made that up in the short term by taking federal stimulus money, which was offered to the states to help bridge us through. And so the governor's budget was based on the fact that you had, as you were calling it, one-time money. In addition, the governor said to our public schools, and of course, part of the strength of the West Metro here is our public schools, we're not going to give you $1.8 billion that you had counted on statewide. We'll pay you back later. It's an IOU. So the budget was balanced by Governor Pawlenty on an IOU and on one-time federal money. So when the Republicans are saying, well, we're going to hold at $34 billion, that's the money the state was spending before, but it doesn't count that additional sort of one-time money. So we have a structural deficit. That's why the Republican budget cuts 140,000 people off of health care. That's why public schools take some big hits. At the same time, we're in a recession, so that there's demand for those services. That's why Governor Dayton, who, by the way, won the election, Ben, the public voted for his proposal, and the elections do have consequences. The question is, what are we going to do? The governor's proposal means that the top 2%, of which I'm happy to be one, we would pay more, and we should. We have not raised income taxes in years. I voted, as did many people here, for substantial cuts in income taxes in previous years. Those of us who are fortunate in this state pay less of a percentage of our income than all the rest of you do here in this room, unless you're fortunate enough to be like me.
Laura Brott, did anybody have a mandate? Governor Dayton had less than 50% of the vote. Republicans won, obviously, a slew of seats in the House and Senate, but he had more votes than they did. Did anybody have a mandate here?
No. Minnesotans like accountability, and what's interesting is that if anybody had a mandate, it was the House and the Senate. I don't believe either side had a mandate in this election. I think that, as my daughter put it, my 14-year-old daughter, she said, Mom, Minnesota politics are as bipolar as our weather. And I think she's exactly right. But no, we tend to have the electorate vote accountability and checks and balances in place, and whether you like it or not, it's what seems to happen. But in terms of why we have a deficit, it's the spending. It's the spending. I remember a number from a few years ago, and I'm sure this number is actually probably ticked up a little bit. Commissioner Dan McElroy said, at the rate of growth in our Health and Human Service budget, we would have to double income taxes every 8 years to keep up with the level of spending in our budgets. Now, even if you wanted to go the route of Mark Dayton's tax increases, which make us one of the highest taxed states in our nation, even if you wanted to go that way, it doesn't account for the spending. You're going to spend yourself into a deficit the next time. And so in terms of what we've got to do, and I think what the Republican legislature was trying to do is reform government. How do you change the dynamic, change that trajectory so that the spending doesn't outpace your ability to afford what you need to afford? And how do you find return on investment? How do you find those things that allow the state and the people of the state to get greater value for the dollars that they're putting in. Right now, why would people put one more dollar into state government if they're not sure that they're getting a good value out of it? And that's the value proposition, I think, that's out there, and that's the value proposition that is going to be have to be tackled due to reforms. You know, government can't run like a business. There's no doubt they're different. But government does not have to run like a bureaucracy. And unfortunately, that bureaucratic measure of what we did last year plus a little bit more is actually putting us in the wrong direction. And it doesn't matter how much taxes you raise. You can't keep up with it. So what you got to do is get the economy moving. And the tax increases that Mark Dayton has been proposing would put us backwards, put us on our heels, and actually would lead us in the wrong direction.
Darren Broughton, what about that, the notion that Governor Dayton only proposes raising taxes on the top 2%, but what signal does that send to business around the country when they see that Minnesota, I believe, would have the second highest rate, top income tax rate, I think, after Hawaii? What signal does that send to, say, Fortune 500 companies that might want to locate here?
Well, and let's be clear, in the governor's last compromise, he said that he was willing to work with the legislature to make sure that business was taken off the table. So there would be no income for anyone who has a small business. You're not going to see an income tax increase. He said that in his press conference a week and a half ago.
S-corps. S-corps.
But here's what it says of corporate America, that we're willing to invest in our future. We're willing to invest in our college students, we're investing in our youth, make sure that we're not having to throw 40 kids in a classroom, making sure that kids can afford to pay the tuition. You know, under the budget plan submitted by the legislature, the U of M is going to see a 19% cut. Minsk-U, a 14% cut. Those are devastating numbers to higher education. And I'm sorry that the point of this is about reform. Cuts do not equal reform. They're not. If we want to talk about reforming how Minnesota operates, we can have an honest conversation about that. But just to say that cuts are reforming Minnesota is not true.
Something you just said caused Ben Golnick to grab that microphone vigorously. Ben, go ahead.
Well, I think there is good reform. I mean, other states have shown, Indiana with Mitch Daniels as an example. I mean, they had a lot of cuts, they shrunk the size of growth, and they reformed services, the way services were delivered. They took a lot of the elements from the private sector and employed them into state government. So I think absolutely, there's a ton of fat out there to cut. I think local governments are the same way. We talk about property tax increases. I saw just the other day on the front of one of the Sun newspapers is this Tonka Connect program, where one of the the communities in the western burbs want to go together for broadband. Well, if some of these cities and some of these counties, it's happening all across the state, have money to be trying to do that, which I think, frankly, the private sector can do a lot better of. Clearly, these governments, there's money there. There are cost savings. There's a way to work better. And there have been reforms, I think, that work. Education, Mark Dayton, I think, smartly agreed to the alternative licensure law, the Republicans and Democrats together. I know Senator Bonoff had worked on that. So I think there have been reforms that have passed. But again, Dayton compromised from, what was it, a 16% increase to maybe a 12% increase. So the Republicans were clear they aren't going to raise taxes, and to complain and grouse at the Republicans, oh, they're not compromising, they're not going to raise taxes, whether it's a huge increase or a slightly less than huge increase, they're not going to do it. So I think they've been pretty clear. And regarding the gubernatorial election, I think that was an aberration to say that people voted for Dayton and Horner together equaled their support for tax increases. I think that race, like many races here in Minnesota, was a pretty crazy one. So I don't think you can say that was a referendum for or against tax increases. I would say locally, if you look at a lot of those races, a lot of long-term DFL incumbents, including in this area, Leo Foley as an example, Don Betzold in Anoka County, were voted out because, frankly, they had a long history of taxing and spending, and Minnesotans were fed up with that.
All right, Matt and Tenza, let's look forward here a little bit. How do we get out of this mess? What happens next? Is there revenue out there that is not tax increase revenue that could satisfy Governor Dayton and everyone could be at least somewhat mollified and we could go home?
Well, anyone out there got a color photocopier? And maybe we could just start manufacturing money. And
this isn't the federal government.
Yeah,
This
so
is
yeah, we
state
can't,
government.
not the Federal Reserve. The problem is to balance the budget, given that, once again, Governor Pawlenty's budget was a budget that was balanced on one-time federal money and on, in essence, borrowing $1 billion from our public schools that has to get paid back at some point here. We can keep kicking the can down the road, but at some point, the teachers represented Benson have to be paid back, I presume. So how do you get out of this? In 2005, we got out of it because when Dean Johnson and I and Steve Svigum and Dick Day, we sat down with the governor over days and days and days. The governor offered a compromise. He said, let's have a tobacco fee. Now I think of that as a tax, and that's not to make fun of the governor about what's a fee or a tax, but raise revenue. I'm a Lutheran, so sin taxes go down pretty well with me. And so that was pretty acceptable to us. And and that money went into education, and that helped the West Metro a lot. But what I hear from my Republican colleagues here and what we hear from the Republican Party chair is that fees aren't acceptable. Obviously, there's been discussion about gaming, and they're saying gaming isn't acceptable. When you define everything out, then it's pretty hard to compromise. So the bottom line that I see, Tom, is this. At the end of the day, if it is impossible to compromise at all, then one side has to completely give up. And then the question is, who does that? Now, in 2003, the Senate Democrats let the Senate Republicans pass the bills. They gave 3 Democratic votes, and the Republicans got their whole budget, which was a budget of cuts here in the West Metro. That meant for the first time we had real cuts in public education. That didn't go down very well. That had big results for the Democrats. Now, alternatively, Governor Dayton, of course, could say, I give up and I'm going to pass Republican bills. In general, the rule is the executive branch wins these fights. It's harder to hold legislators together. And right now, on the eve of the battle, it's easy to be brave. But I can tell you, and you'll recall this, Tom, because you reported this on that issue in 2005, during the 7th or 8th day of the government shutdown, favorability for the legislature dropped to, I want to say it was under 20%?
Yes, 17 or 18%.
17 or 18%. Those are legislators, not all of them, some will hang tough, but I saw many Democrats during then and Republicans who began to realize that maybe compromise wasn't such a bad thing.
Laura Brown, here's the funny thing about compromise. Governor Pawlenty did compromise with the health impact fee with Democrats, and Democrats about 10 minutes later and every day since have clubbed him over the head with that health impact fee, calling it a tax. So he compromised in good faith and has paid the price for it ever since. Is that one of the reasons why it is so difficult to reach compromise? Because the moment you compromise, the other side's going to club you over the head with it.
Well, it is interesting. The compromise and the bipartisanship, it seems to always go one way. And, we always see in the Star and Tribune the lauding when Republicans join Democrats to do something. But there's often times where Democrats join Republicans, but you never see it lauded out there about the Democrats who stood with Republicans to make sure that tax increases didn't happen on the business owners. There was Democrats who stood with Republicans to make sure we reformed our health care, our education system. But you never hear about that compromise and that type of bipartisanship. But I do think that the word compromise is just so interesting in that it implies that you're giving away something that you believe in. And when you compromise, you've got to each go home with something if that's what you want. Now, here's where we're at today, is that you've got Republicans who've compromised and said, we're going to go to $34 billion. We're going to compromise and not go backwards. We're not going to have an all-cuts budget. We're going to actually allow state government to increase. We're going to allow it to increase at a reasonable rate. And Governor, now you need to compromise and get off the idea that we're going to raise taxes. And so unfortunately, if the governor was about getting more revenue, I think that we would be able to get something done, because there's all sorts of ways to get new revenue if you want it outside of the general fund number of $34 billion.
What are some of those ways?
There's, I'm not in the legislature, but there's, a lot of people don't understand that only about half of our budget is actually a general fund budget. There's all sorts of other budgets out there, whether they're legacy budgets or whether they're healthcare budgets or whether they're other trust budgets. There's all sorts of budgets out there that you can move around, make some reforms, and find some money. So there's money out there. We've got a big, beefy state budget. But when you think about what Governor Dayton wants, unfortunately, to me, is that he has a quest to raise taxes on the wealthy. on the business owners. And that's the part that is going to be impossible for the Republicans to meet him on. They just simply won't do it. So if he's about revenue, there's a way to get it done. If he's about raising taxes on the rich, it just simply won't happen.
Darren Broughton, I've heard the idea floated, maybe leverage some surplus legacy funds that are coming in with that tax that was passed by taxpayers a couple years ago. Any possibility of something like that?
I don't think that piece is going to fly. I do think that there are other options.
Something's got to fly.
Something's going to fly, and I think there are options on the table. And I think, you know, if you just put all the sin taxes together, you put gaming on the table, it's about $200 million a year. You put a $1 or $1.50 increase on tobacco, it gets you about another 200. You do a couple cents. You know, Mayor Coleman had talked about putting a couple cents on liquor for stadium. If you put that onto the general fund stuff, you can get you a little bit more money. So you could basically sew together a Frankenstein kind of revenue piece that allows you to get to about $800 million without actually touching income tax. You know, Senator Ortman and Senator Roebling earlier this session really had a good conversation, I think, talking about how do we take out some of the policy pieces that we do in the tax code and how we streamline that, take out some of the exemptions. They got their hands slapped by the Republican chairman, Tony Sutton, talking about any sort of conversation of streamlining tax code means a tax increase. I don't think that's true. But I think there are numerous options on the table if the legislature wants to move forward with them. I think the governor's open to doing any of them, but he has to see some progress.
And Ben, I've heard the same thing. I've heard Governor Dayton is willing. He wants revenue. It doesn't have to be this tax on the top 2%. It's got to come from somewhere. I know you had floated the idea of taxing Twins' victories, and then this year that didn't turn out so well. So that certainly is no longer a possibility. We're actually deeper in debt now. But what is out there? What are the possibilities?
Well, I think, you know, just to go back to that legacy money, you know, I talked to someone in Rochester a few weeks ago, and they said, hey, you know, to me, the Guthrie Theater means nothing to me. The Minnesota Vikings are, you know, more of a part of Minnesota's culture than the Guthrie Theater. So I think, you know, the Arts and Crafts Amendment or legacy, whatever it's called, I think there certainly, you know, should be a strong look at, you know, perhaps using that money. And I know that's probably an anathema to Senator Bonoff. She's shaking her head in disbelief. But I think that most certainly should be on the most.
If she tosses that table over, that's going to make great TV. So.
She is sitting next to me. I'm going to have to change my cup of coffee out after I go back to my seat. I think there are options. I think the gambling may be on the table, but again, I think it's you know, it's Mark Dayton's, in my opinion, obsession with raising income taxes on Minnesotans, and I'll repeat it again. It's taking money from the private sector, and to say that's not going to impact, it's going to impact executives who work for these corporations. It's going to have a huge impact on everybody. So to think that raising taxes on the wealthy is going to just get us out of this, I just think it's a completely naive argument, and I think that maybe gaming would be an option. Maybe there are other fees that could be raised. Maybe you need to get to 800 million or $1 billion, but I think there are ways there. But at this point, at least, it looks like Dayton's position is just intractable. He's not willing to do anything but raise income taxes, whether it's the top 2% or 4% or whatever. So I think we've got to see some movement there.
Laura, what about the idea that gambling revenue would be the perfect compromise position because both sides hate it? I mean, they both have to hold their nose and say, okay, let's do that.
Well, I think that's an interesting view of compromise. But, you know, one thing, Tom, I wanted to hit is that, you know, I've heard twice here today, and you hear it in the news too, well, this is what Tony Sutton says, the Republican chair party boss, whatever. Everybody in this room should know that the people in the legislature are independent thinkers. And Speaker Zellers knows this better than anybody, is that his caucus, both caucuses on the right, are independent thinkers. So this whole find a boogeyman guy and say that he's dictating what goes on in the legislature is just simply inaccurate. You know, the legislators and the leadership are strong enough on their own to find a way to get this thing done. And so what each of the party chairs say is interesting but not important to the job of the day-to-day job of the legislature. And so, you know, it's nice to have that comment. But the fact of the matter is that the House and the Senate Republicans will put forward compromise positions, will put forward compromise provisions that have reform, that have the ability to close the gap. And I think finding new revenue is not something they're overly interested in because they view that we found $2 billion of new revenue already.
Just a little over 5 minutes left. We know if there's a government shutdown, as Matt pointed out before, this one might be a lot more deeper and more severe than the one we had in 2005. So we know a lot of Minnesotans obviously would be losers in that situation. But Darren, let me start with you. Who loses the most politically if this goes to a government shutdown? I mean, obviously, if the two sides are willing to go there, one of them thinks they've got something to gain from doing it. Who's a winner, who's a loser here?
I think at the end, I think they're probably both going to be the losers in this whole battle. The challenge, I think, for the legislature, and this is not a partisan comment, the governor has the biggest megaphone in the state. He has the soapbox. He has the ability to travel around. He's the person that everyone knows. And so he's going to be the one that gets to articulate and message this the way he wants to do it. And I know that the legislative leaders will do their fly around, but and no offense to Speaker Zellers, I don't know how many people in Dodge Center know who you are compared to the governor.
Kurt, doesn't your wife have relatives in Dodge Center? And I've heard even a couple of them don't know who
And
you
so,
are.
I mean, I think in the short term, I think this is a win for the governor. I think a long term, I think it's a loss for both.
Matt?
Well, at the end of the day, the public wants political leaders to compromise. And, so, Laura, I just have to respectfully disagree with you. While folks don't like to pay taxes, they also like their roads. And they want to have public schools that are decent. And they would prefer to not worry about whether or not their health insurance premiums are going to keep going up and up and up as insurance companies are forced to cost shift onto those of us who are left who have health insurance. And so people are willing to accept some compromises. People also understand that the no new tax pledge in the budget means that those who are at the top 2% might not pay more income tax, but we do wind up paying some more property tax, and we have other costs that come on to us. So folks want leaders who'll step up and say, you know what, I can't have everything. Governor Dayton has said, I will make cuts, I'll make substantial cuts. He's signed a number of bills agreeing to reform. If Republican leaders aren't willing to make some level of compromise on some sort of revenue, I think that they're going to wind up in deep trouble. And the voters, at the end of the day, understand you're not going to get everything. And so saying that compromise is impossible or we've got a principle and that's all we want to do, Tom Horner ran for governor, and he said we need to have a balanced approach. Mark Dayton also argued for a balanced approach. And Tom Emmer didn't, and Tom Emmer lost and did not come anywhere near 50% of the vote. And that's where the majority of the public is. And so at the end of the day, where are we going to be? We're going to be in a difficult, long-term, protracted shutdown. I believe that's what's going to happen. And the side that will win politically is certainly not the general public. The general public is going to see a lot of hardship in the short term, and politicians will pay for that in the long term.
And Ben Golnick, what would happen in the 2012 elections? Every member of the legislature up for re-election.
Well, I think it's too far away to predict what's going to happen. I mean, I think a lot of this is going to be tied to the economy, just like the presidential election. Many think Obama's beatable. Some on the Republican side think anybody can beat him. And I think it's way too early to say how it's going to impact. If there's a shutdown here and next session goes relatively smoothly, I don't think it's going to have a major impact on the elections. I think regarding polling numbers, you see this a lot with Washington, D.C., Congress has a 22% approval rating, and then back in their district, each incumbent is wildly popular. So I think to paint with a broad brush, the entire legislature say, oh, they're going to dump all incumbents out because of this. I don't think that's truthful. I think at the end of the day, people elected a lot of these new Republicans because of what they ran on. That was reform. It's no new spending, no new taxes, and I think that's what their expectation is, to have that for them at the Capitol. Fortunately, the Republicans have stood strong, and I think they're going to continue to stand strong. And as Matt alluded to, people do expect leaders to lead, and I think people expect Governor Dayton to lead. And frankly, I think last week we saw, appointing suggesting to appoint a mediator. I think that's just absurd. I think normal people are kind of like, okay, well, he's our elected governor. Why can't he get this thing done? He wants to bring in a third-party mediator who, incidentally, I think Tom broke the news, is a DFL donor. I just think it's absurd. So I think Mark Dayton needs to show some leadership and needs to back away from his obsession with income tax increases.
And Laura Broad.
Well, only in government is growing a number, is an increase deemed to be a cut. I mean, only in government, you and your businesses, if you have more than you spent last year, how can you call that a cut? And that's where we're at in government. But I think the people of this state are ready for politicians to be real and to be honest about the challenges that we have as a state and actually on the national level too. We have been making promises that we simply can't keep. You cannot keep up with this rate of spending. You know, our economy just isn't growing at that rate. You know, the whole supply side economics of the past, just right now, our economy is not growing at a rate that supports the growth in our spending. And so we've got to start pulling back on the spending. And you can do so in a way that makes sense, and you can do so in a way that's based on priorities. You know, the idea that what we did last year is a priority for us tomorrow can't work anymore. You've got to evaluate things based on where we want to go and how we're going to get there. But what we did last year should be part of the puzzle. But gosh, we shouldn't base everything we do on what we did last year. Is that really forward thinking? Is that really what you think the people of the state want? I think the people of the state want to know where we're going, and they want to know how we're going to get there, and they want politicians who are going to stand up, do what they say, and live with it. And I think that's where we're at.
Just 1 minute left. Quick lightning round. I want to hear from each one of you. Yes or no, will there be a government shutdown? If it's yes, how long will it last? Laura?
I'm with Senator Bonoff.
No, no. 7 other people have already used that line. You need to give me a yes or a no and a length of time.
I grew up on Blazing Saddles, so I'm going to say harumph to that. But you know, I actually think that because Governor Dayton has a quest to raise taxes on a small part of the state, that he is going to drive us into a government shutdown, which I hope will be very short. I think that there is a way to solve this without raising taxes, and I think there is a way to solve it without a government shutdown. Senator Bonoff, I'm with you.
She still has a little politician left in her, so yes in short, I think is what we got.
My short answer will be yes. And, you know, I think it's probably going to be 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Matt?
I agree with Darren.
Who's with Senator Bonoff?
I'll say yes, and I think a month and a half.
And finally, Viking Stadium, if we ever get to a special session, with this budget mess going on, is there even going to be time to entertain that? I want yes or no, and Minneapolis or St. Paul.
Sorry, guys, no.
No.
Not this year. It will happen next year. And I think St. Paul's looking pretty good.
Disclaimer, Vikings have been a client of mine. I think people expect leaders to multitask. I think there's absolutely a chance that a Viking stadium passes, and I believe the Arden Hills site is clearly the best option.
All right, Ben. And Ben, thank you for not saying you were with Senator Bonoff on the stadium issue. Appreciate that. We are out of time. Let's have a big round of applause for all of our panelists. And thank you all. And remember, no matter what kind of day you're having a better morning than Newt Gingrich. Thank you.
Okay, wait, just 1 second. I want to thank everybody for being here. Tom Hauser, thank you very much for doing this. I'm very glad you did. Thank you, Laura, Darren, Ben, and Matt. Thank you so much for being with us here this morning. We appreciate it. And I also wanted to recognize Commissioner Mark Stenglein is here with us. Mark, are you still here? Thank you so much. You know, we're so fortunate here to have not only our local legislators engaged, but we often have our county commissioners join us as well. So thank you very much. We appreciate having you a part of our community. The last thing I wanted to announce is that TwinWest is in the midst of our 100 members in 100 days membership initiative. If we reach 100 members by July 8th, TwinWest will be giving $4,000 to area food shelves. That has been matched by Grand Casino Mille Lacs and Hinckley, who has said they also will give $4,000 to area food shelves. This is a great way for the business community to show how much we support our communities. So if you are not a member of TwinWest and enjoyed this program and want to be a part of these going forward, please grab a staff person. If you have a referral, as a member, we would love you to send that referral. If you refer someone and they join, there is also a program where you get some credits for programs going forward. So this is the last of our series for 2011. Legislative Breakfast. I want to thank all of you for making this such a great year of programming, for being here, for assisting us. I also want to thank Judy Johnson, who really pulls all of these. I get up here and read a great script. So Judy, thank you very much for that. And I would say with that, everybody have a fabulous day, great weekend, a fabulous summer, and we'll be back here in January. All right, thanks everybody.